the next president of the United States?
In my humble view, lights out.
You wrote Trump is toast. Do you stand behind that today?
Oh, even more so. I feel the same way that I felt a few weeks ago that Trump is toast.
Oh, J.D. Vance, you just stepped up in a way that I've never seen in my political life.
It'll be tied on Election Day, as always it will. The polls will be tied, and then he'll lose.
I think she's going to win.
I think it's going to be a blowout, actually. I don't think it's going to be a close race.
I'm sorry. No!
Family, I chose women.
I will burn this whole place to the ground.
You voted for a racist, a rapist, a dictator. You voted for a bully, a bigot, and a narcissist.
Who the fuck is voting for him?
What we did not have is white women who voted about 52%, right, for Donald Trump, uneducated white women.
That kind of extreme, sort of extremist, right-wing, fascist-type government.
We may not have rights tomorrow. What's happening?
I worry about my children's future, especially my daughter, who now has less rights than I have.
Authoritarianism.
How did we get here? Fuck you. I don't want to hear about how shitty your life gets under his policies. I don't understand how scared of this man I am.
Well, it would help if we could regulate social media.
How fucking dare you?
Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we're gonna give Kamala Harris's presidential bid the autopsy it deserves, like we're dissecting a roadkill skunk. Her campaign was like a spaceship with no fuel. It looked good on the launch pad, but it wasn't going anywhere. It was like the political equivalent of a rogue planet. No sun to guide it, no path to follow, just drifting aimlessly in the political void like a turd in a zero-gravity toilet. Alright, let's crack this sucker open and dive into the autopsy. First of all, let's talk about the Biden connection. Now, I understand that Harris wasn't in charge at the time, but she, if anyone, was in the perfect position to object to any policy she didn't agree with as vice president. Add to that she's basically said that she wouldn't change any actions of the Biden administration, and it becomes clear that she bears some responsibility for the Biden administration's many missteps, whether she likes it or not. It certainly rubs off on her, and it sticks to her like stink on cheese. So let's go over some of the things that went horribly wrong during Biden's tenure. President Biden, along with Vice President Harris, presided over some of the worst instances of government overreach in living memory, namely the way the pandemic lockdowns were handled. At the same time as liberties were being curtailed and normal people were subsisting for months on a paltry handout of a few $1,000s, millions of dollars were handed out like candy to rich people in the form of PPP loans, most of which were later forgiven. People who were suspicious of Big Pharma were treated like criminals and were mercilessly vilified by both the Biden administration itself and the media. People lost their livelihoods, and Democrats basically spat on them. In fact, polls showed that half of Democrats supported putting the unvaccinated in camps, and these are the guys who lecture you on fascism. Additionally, Biden's handling of the Ukraine situation certainly leaves a lot to be desired. I'm not saying the Ukraine doesn't have the right to defend itself, it certainly does. But the Biden administration has consistently failed to explain to the American people why America has to pay for this war, particularly since Ukraine is not a member of NATO. What is the point of having a military alliance if we're also going to defend countries that are not in said alliance? The line should be clear. If you're not in NATO, don't expect us to defend or pay for your war. It's like not having insurance but still expecting the insurance company to pay up. On top of that, the Biden administration also saw record inflation ravaging the economy. It was like watching your savings account shrink faster than a porn star's dignity. And of course, then followed the classic gaslighting pattern of first denying it and then further gaslighting you by saying it is happening, but it's a good thing. Legacy media, of course, jumped on the bandwagon and started polishing Biden's wrinkled old knob like a $20 hooker. Also, the propaganda clips on social media of the FEMA relief efforts certainly didn't help the Biden administration. Using 15 people to move a small log 30 feet seems like a pretty perfect illustration of government inefficiency. It certainly isn't the biggest point, but I thought I'd mention it. And let us not forget Biden's cabinet of circus clowns. A kleptomaniac cross-dresser in charge of nuclear power, a high-ranking military fetishist uploading pictures of himself in both military uniform and fetish gear, Senate staffers having sex in the Senate, people on the White House lawn flashing and jiggling their tits, and an obese trans woman in charge of healthcare because fuck you, that's why. There are more examples, but I'll stop there. And with all that now said about Biden, we finally get to Kamala Harris's own campaign. One of the biggest problems with Kamala's campaign was her inability or unwillingness to connect with the working class. In the past, when the Democratic Party still cared about the working class, they had no problems with limiting immigration since it only impacts the working class. They were also for tariffs. Now, however, when Democrats have started thumbing their nose at workers and instead try to appeal only to coastal elites, mass immigration serves as a massive virtue signal to those urbanites, and it doesn't matter how much damage those policies have already caused here, or in Europe for that matter. They now only care about satisfying their donor class in the shape of George Soros and his ilk. Make no mistake about it, when they talk about how only stupid people are voting for Trump and that they shouldn't get to vote, keep in mind that what they actually mean is that poor people shouldn't get to vote. Another problem with Kamala's campaign is the tendency to call everyone racists. People just don't respond well to being called names when in fact they are just trying to feed their children. When you're having problem putting food on the table, that's what matters. And being called all manner of pejoratives isn't going to make you any more likely to vote for the ones calling you those things. The same goes for the campaign calling Trump Hitler. Again. All this hyperbolic screeching about how Trump will enact a fascist dictatorship rings particularly hollow, seeing as how we've already been through a term with him. People know what to expect, and they're just unable to reconcile reality with what Democrats and the media are telling them. Seriously, how many times can you cry wolf before people stop caring? Then we get to the campaign's inability to connect with the male demographic. Instead of trying to understand what men are going through and why they're not connecting with Kamala's message, they just tried to shame men into voting for her with cries of sexism and toxic masculinity. Why they expected that tired strategy to work this time when it's been tried and failed so many times, I will never know. But it's clear that this was yet another strategy that did more harm than good. Besides, no one can shame anyone in the privacy of a voting booth. Another thing that really undermined the campaign was leaning into identity politics so much. No one cares about your identity politics. No one chooses their president based on checking a box for first Indian woman or first black woman or whatever. Voters only ask one thing: what will you do for me? Kamala Harris consistently failed to present what her policies were. Most questions in interviews were answered either by word salad or by not answering at all, choosing instead to go off on some irrelevant tangent about how I was raised middle class, or the politics of joy, whatever the hell that means. As vice president, Harris was of course on the hook for the Biden administration's performance, including economic challenges, immigration issues, and public perception of the administration's accomplishments. However, while it's natural for a vice president to stand by her boss, so to speak, as a presidential candidate, she should have said what she would have done differently. When asked, she couldn't even name one thing that she would have changed if she were president instead of Biden. For fuck's sake, what did she want to do with her presidency? Nobody knows. She clearly should have thrown Biden under the bus, so to speak, like every other vice president running for office. A clean break would have served her well, and I'm sure even Biden would have understood. Harris did not successfully connect with key demographic groups, particularly the working class, like I've said before, and those in swing states. Her campaign's focus on attacking Trump's character rather than presenting a robust, appealing platform or addressing voter concerns directly was a serious misstep. She didn't really have an actual political campaign. She wasn't campaigning for anything, only against something. That's no way to win, and no amount of celebrity endorsements is going to change that, or feed your kids. All she had were scare tactics, insults, and platitudes. Most people would be hard-pressed to name anything Kamala Harris actually stands for. Her only selling point seems to have been, "I'm not Trump," gimmicks, and celebrities. People don't care about that. They care about inflation, crime, immigration, taxes, and so on. Furthermore, it certainly didn't help that they trotted out Liz Cheney as a supporter of Kamala. What on earth were they thinking? She is the exact type of warmongering neocon that neither side's like. It's quite baffling. It's like banging your head against a wall to cure your headache. Moreover, it was certainly a mistake for her to not go through a proper primary. Now, there's really nothing Kamala Harris could have done about that, of course. Biden is clearly to blame for that one. He should have stepped aside much sooner, and unfortunately for Harris, this had a huge impact on her campaign. Not having a clear mandate from the Democratic base and the merit of being the last person standing clearly hurt her credibility. Another thing that hurt Kamala was the assassination attempts on Trump. Sure, there's nothing she could have done to mitigate that either, but seeing as how momentous those events were, I figured it would be negligent to not mention them. Next, we have 3 minor points. First, Peanut the squirrel and Fred the raccoon. Now, this might be a silly point, and I'm not saying Kamala bears any direct responsibility for this, but the enormous government overreach of storming a guy's house and killing his pets for no reason in a deep blue state certainly left a stain on her nonetheless. The government going full SWAT on a guy's pets doesn't exactly scream compassionate leadership, particularly since it happened just days before the election. The second minor point is Kamala's husband and the mainstream media's refusal to report anything about his ex coming out and accusing him of domestic violence. Again, this isn't something that one can fault Kamala for, but it rubs off on her anyway. People still remember how the media censored the Hunter Biden laptop story, which turned out to be true, and if this domestic violence story is true, then it throws her ability to be a good judge of character into question. I certainly don't know if this had any effect at all, but I'm guessing it rubbed at least a few people the wrong way. The third minor point is Kamala's old statements from previous primaries that came back to haunt her like a bad ex-boyfriend. For instance, her support for providing sex change surgeries for prisoners and letting biological males into women's prisons. Sure, she didn't actually push these ideas in this election as far as I know, but voters can and will judge a candidate on the totality of their character, including any past actions that they may have disliked. Another more important point that may have hurt her was her unwavering support for Israel. Now, this is certainly no different than Trump's position, who stands by Israel as well. But I suspect that this stance made many young voters stay at home playing video games instead of voting. Hey, Undoomed, you incredibly handsome yet humble man, I hear you say. What about the debate? Well, Truth be told, I don't think it made much of a difference. Those who were convinced stayed convinced, those who were unconvinced stayed unconvinced, and those who were undecided stayed undecided. Everyone knew what to expect, and that's precisely what they got. Harris simply performed as well as her campaign could have hoped for, so I don't really think it changed anyone's mind. Then we get to the biggest blunder of all. It was a catastrophic, career-ending, criminally stupid mistake for Kamala Harris to decline to go on Joe Rogan, the biggest podcast on the planet, which also happens to speak directly to men, the one group she desperately needed to convince. That's like refusing to eat because you're on a diet in the middle of a famine. Instead, she chose to go on fluff piece podcasts and shows that no man would ever be caught dead watching. I cannot stress enough what a disastrous miscalculation this was. But who knows? Maybe her handlers were so scared of what her performance would be like that they barred it. Maybe she would have just rambled incoherently and evaded questions for 3 hours and made it even worse. Maybe they were right. Anyways, I hope Democrats learn from this. Competition is good both for business and politics, but I wouldn't be surprised if they don't. I wouldn't be surprised if their internal election autopsy concludes that they need to lean even more into identity politics, that they didn't go far enough left, that it's somehow the voters' fault, that the voters are racist, sexist, and if they just blame and villainize the voters harder, they'll change their mind. We'll see, but I'm not holding my breath.
I don't think so. No, 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 no. I don't think so. No, 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 no. It's never, ever, 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 ever gonna happen. I don't think so. No, 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 no. I don't think so. No, 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 no. It's never, ever, ever.